The sun had just begun its descent, casting a warm golden glow across the suburban streets. A faint chill in the late afternoon air hinted at the approaching evening, and the world seemed to hum with the quiet rhythm of an ordinary day. For Sarah, a hard-working single mom in her late 30s, it was just another chaotic afternoon filled with errands, work calls, and a never-ending to-do list. She had just picked up her 8-year-old son, Liam, from soccer practice and was rushing to grab groceries before heading home to prepare dinner. Life was hectic but familiar, a well-practiced routine of balancing work, motherhood, and everything in between. Driving her aging sedan through the crowded streets, Sarah felt a sense of accomplishment for managing to keep everything on track that day. Her car, a 10-year-old silver Honda, had seen better days but was still her trusty companion through life's ups and downs. Liam, sitting in the back seat, was happily chatting about his soccer game, his voice animated as he recounted every goal and near miss. Sarah couldn't help but smile. In moments like these, despite the stress and fatigue, she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the little things. As they approached a traffic light, a strange noise disrupted the peace. A loud, grinding sound emanated from beneath the car, followed by a series of unsettling jerks. Sarah's heart sank. She pulled over to the side of the road, her mind racing. This wasn't the first time her car had given her trouble, but today, of all days, was not ideal for a breakdown. Liam looked concerned, his chatter replaced by a nervous silence. "It's okay, buddy," Sarah reassured him, trying to mask her own rising anxiety. She turned off the engine and stepped out to assess the situation. A quick glance at the tires revealed nothing unusual, but the smell of burning oil wafted through the air, a telltale sign of a deeper issue. With no immediate solution in sight and her phone battery dwindling, Sarah felt a pang of helplessness. Standing by the roadside, she waved half-heartedly at passing cars, hoping someone might stop to help. Most drivers zoomed past without a second glance, their faces fixed on their own destinations. A few slowed down momentarily, their eyes filled with curiosity, but none offered assistance. Sarah began to feel the weight of her situation. She was a single mom with limited resources, stranded on the side of the road, and her options were rapidly dwindling. After what felt like an eternity, a beat-up pickup truck pulled over a few feet ahead. The driver, a man in his 50s with a scruffy beard and a baseball cap, stepped out. He had the rugged appearance of someone who had spent years working with his hands, his jeans stained with oil and grease. His eyes were kind, but his demeanor was reserved. "Need some help?" he asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. Sarah hesitated for a moment. She had always been cautious about strangers, especially when it came to her and Liam's safety. But something about the man's straightforwardness put her at ease. She nodded, explaining the strange noise and the jerking motion of the car. The man introduced himself as Mike and immediately got to work, popping the hood and inspecting the engine. Sarah stood nearby, watching as he moved with the confidence of someone who knew their way around cars. Liam, curious and a little braver now, peeked out from the back seat. Mike worked in silence for a while, occasionally muttering to himself as he examined the engine. "Your alternator's shot," he finally said, wiping his hands on a rag. "You're lucky it didn't give out completely while you were driving." Sarah's heart sank. She knew enough about cars to understand that an alternator was not a minor issue. Repairs like this could be costly, and with her tight budget, she wasn't sure how she could afford it. She thanked Mike for his help, her mind already racing with plans to call a tow truck and figure out a way to manage the expense. But Mike surprised her. "I've got an old alternator at home that might fit this model," he said. "It's not brand new, but it'll work for now. If you're okay with it, I can bring it over and fix this up for you." Sarah was stunned by the offer. She wasn't used to strangers going out of their way to help, especially without expecting something in return. "That's really kind of you," she said cautiously. "But I don't have much to pay you with right now." Mike waved her off. Don't worry about that. Let me see if I can help first. He drove off, leaving Sarah and Liam waiting in the car. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours, but eventually, Mike returned with the promised part. True to his word, he got to work immediately, his hands moving with practiced precision as he replaced the faulty alternator. Sarah couldn't help but feel a mix of gratitude and disbelief. Who was this man, and why was he going out of his way to help someone he didn't even know? As he worked, they chatted. Sarah learned that Mike had once owned an auto repair shop but had closed it down years ago after facing financial difficulties. Now, he did odd jobs and freelance repairs to make ends meet. Despite his own struggles, he seemed genuinely content, his perspective shaped by years of hard work and life's ups and downs. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mike closed the hood and tested the engine. The car roared back to life, its familiar hum a comforting sound to Sarah's ears. She felt a wave of relief wash over her and thanked Mike profusely. "You saved our day," she said, pulling out her wallet. "Please, let me pay you something for your time and effort." Mike hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea. But Sarah insisted, handing him what little cash she had. He accepted it reluctantly, his weathered face breaking into a small, grateful smile. As Mike prepared to leave, he paused and turned back to Sarah. His next words were quiet but carried a weight that lingered in the air. "You know," he said, almost as if speaking to himself, "there was a time when I was the one stranded on the side of the road, and a stranger helped me out. I promised myself I'd pay it forward someday. Guess today was that day." Sarah froze, the gravity of his remark sinking in. She looked at him, truly seeing him for the first time, not just as the man who had helped her but as someone who had his own story, his own struggles and triumphs. In that moment, she realized the profound impact of a simple act of kindness, a ripple effect that connected people in ways they often couldn't see. Mike tipped his hat, climbed into his truck, and drove off, leaving Sarah and Liam in stunned silence. As they watched his truck disappear into the distance, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was more than just a coincidence. It was a reminder of the power of humanity, the importance of paying it forward, and the unexpected ways people could touch each other's lives. The rest of the drive home was quiet, Liam eventually drifting off in the back seat. But Sarah couldn't stop thinking about Mike's words. She resolved to do something in return, not just for him but for someone else, to keep the cycle of kindness alive. That evening, as she tucked Liam into bed, she told him the story of what had happened. "You never know how much your kindness can mean to someone," she said softly. "Always remember that." Little did she know, this experience would not only change her perspective but also inspire her to make a difference in her community in ways she never imagined. The following morning dawned brighter, but Sarah woke up with a sense of lingering gratitude that warmed her heart like the early rays of the sun filtering through her bedroom window. As she sat by the kitchen table, sipping her coffee and scrolling absent-mindedly through her phone, her thoughts kept circling back to the previous day's events. Mike's act of kindness and his enigmatic remark about paying it forward weighed heavily on her mind. She couldn't help but wonder about the full story behind his words. What had happened to him? Who had helped him, and why did it mean so much to him that he chose to extend that kindness to her? She looked at Liam, who was munching on his cereal with the carefree energy only an 8-year-old could muster. She smiled softly, grateful that he was safe and oblivious to the stresses that had consumed her the day before. But Sarah wasn't someone who let things lie. Her curiosity, combined with a growing determination to understand the man who had helped her, prompted her to make a decision. She resolved to find out more about Mike, not out of nosiness, but because she felt an inexplicable pull to understand the humanity behind his gesture. After dropping Liam off at school, Sarah found herself driving toward the intersection where her car had broken down the day before. She hoped to see Mike's truck again, parked somewhere nearby or passing through. While it might have seemed like a long shot, she felt compelled to try. Luck, it seemed, was on her side. As she approached a small diner on the corner of the street, she spotted the familiar, battered pickup truck parked outside. Sarah hesitated for a moment. What would she even say? How would she explain her sudden interest without coming across as intrusive? But something inside her pushed her forward. Gathering her nerves, she parked her car and stepped inside the diner. The smell of coffee and bacon greeted her, along with the gentle murmur of conversation and the clinking of cutlery against plates. It was the kind of place where everyone seemed to know everyone else, and she immediately felt out of place. Mike was sitting at the counter, a cup of coffee in front of him and a worn baseball cap pulled low over his forehead. He seemed deep in thought, staring into his cup as if it held the answers to life's questions. Sarah approached him cautiously, feeling a mix of nervousness and determination. "Mike," she said softly. He looked up, his expression shifting from surprise to recognition. "Oh, hey," he said, offering a small smile. "Didn't expect to see you here. Everything okay with the car?" "Yes, it's running perfectly," she said quickly. "Thanks to you." She hesitated, trying to find the right words. "I wanted to thank you again. And, well, I was curious about what you said yesterday. About paying it forward. It sounded like there was more to that story." Mike's smile faded slightly, replaced by a contemplative look. He gestured to the stool next to him. "Have a seat," he said. "I guess I owe you an explanation." Sarah slid onto the stool, ordering a cup of coffee as Mike began to speak. His voice was steady but tinged with emotion, each word carrying the weight of past experiences. "About 15 years ago," he began, "I was a different man. I had my own auto shop, a family, a decent life. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. My wife got sick, cancer. We spent every penny we had on her treatments, trying to give her a fighting chance. I was working day and night, trying to keep the shop running and take care of her at the same time." He paused, taking a sip of his coffee as he gathered his thoughts. "One night, on my way home from the hospital, my truck broke down. It was late, and I was stuck in the middle of nowhere. No phone, no way to call for help. I was exhausted, desperate, and honestly, at my wit's end. That's when a man pulled over. He didn't ask questions, didn't expect anything in return. He just helped me get my truck running again. I tried to pay him, but he wouldn't take a dime. He told me something I'll never forget: one day, you'll meet someone who needs help as much as you did tonight. When that day comes, pay it forward." Mike's voice grew quieter as he continued. "I didn't realize how much those words would stick with me. My wife passed away not long after that. I lost the shop, couldn't keep it running without her. Life hasn't been easy since then, but every time I see someone in need, I remember that night. And I try to do what he told me to do." Sarah listened intently, her heart aching for the man who had endured so much loss and yet carried himself with such quiet strength. His story was more than she had expected, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the profound impact of even the smallest acts of kindness. "Mike," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't even know what to say. Thank you for sharing that with me. I think the world needs more people like you." He shrugged, his humility evident. "I'm just trying to do my part. We all have a role to play, you know." Their conversation lingered in Sarah's mind long after she left the diner. She couldn't shake the feeling that Mike's story needed to be shared, that his example could inspire others to think beyond themselves and make a difference. She decided to take the first step by doing something she had never done before: organize a community event. Over the next few weeks, Sarah worked tirelessly to bring her idea to life. She reached out to local businesses, schools, and community centers, sharing Mike's story and her vision for an event that celebrated acts of kindness. The response was overwhelming. People donated time, resources, and funds, eager to be part of something meaningful. The event, which Sarah called Pay It Forward Day, was held at the local park. It featured activities for kids, live music, and booths where people could share stories of kindness or commit to acts of service. The centerpiece of the event was a large board where attendees could write down how they planned to pay it forward. By the end of the day, the board was covered in messages, each one a testament to the ripple effect of compassion. Mike attended the event, though he tried to keep a low profile. Sarah couldn't resist calling him out during her speech, sharing his story with the crowd. He was visibly moved, his eyes shining with unshed tears as he watched the community come together in the spirit of giving. As the sun set and the event came to a close, Sarah stood next to Mike, both of them watching as families and friends lingered, their laughter and conversations filling the air. "You started all this, you know," Sarah said, nudging him gently. Mike shook his head. "No, you did. All I did was fix a car." They shared a laugh, the kind that comes from a deep understanding of life's complexities and the joy that can be found in its simplest moments. For Sarah, the event was more than a success. It was a reminder that even in the midst of life's chaos, there was room for hope, connection, and change. As she drove home that evening, Liam asleep in the back seat once again, Sarah felt a sense of fulfillment she hadn't experienced in years. She glanced at the rearview mirror, her eyes meeting her own reflection. She realized that she, too, had changed. Mike's story, his kindness, had planted a seed in her heart, a determination to live a life that made a difference. The event was only the beginning. In the weeks and months that followed, Sarah found herself more attuned to opportunities to help others. Whether it was volunteering at a local shelter, mentoring a young coworker, or simply offering a listening ear to a friend in need, she embraced the philosophy of paying it forward. And every time she did, she thought of Mike, the stranger who had stopped to help her on the side of the road and ended up changing her life in ways she could never have imagined. As the weeks passed after the success of Pay It Forward Day, Sarah's life began to settle back into its usual rhythm. But something had shifted within her, a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. The story of Mike's quiet act of kindness and the chain reaction it had sparked in the community became a beacon in her life, a reminder that even the smallest gestures could create ripples of change. The event had not only brought the town together but also sparked a sense of unity that hadn't been felt in years. Local businesses collaborated on charity drives, neighbors reached out to help each other in ways they hadn't before, and social media buzzed with stories of kindness inspired by the event. Sarah found herself at the center of it all, unexpectedly becoming a community leader and advocate for acts of goodwill. But she wasn't alone. Mike, though reluctant to step into the spotlight, had become a quiet symbol of the movement. One crisp Saturday morning, Sarah received an unexpected call. It was from the local newspaper. They had heard about the event and wanted to do a feature on her and Mike. The reporter was enthusiastic, eager to share the story with a broader audience and highlight the impact it had on the town. Sarah agreed, but with one condition: the story had to focus on the community and the people who had carried the spirit of paying it forward beyond the event. The interview was scheduled for the following week, and Sarah decided to meet with Mike beforehand to prepare. She arrived at his small house on the outskirts of town, a modest home surrounded by a neatly kept yard. Mike greeted her at the door, looking slightly uncomfortable but resigned to the attention. "I'm not much for interviews," he admitted, leading her into the living room. The space was cozy and unpretentious, filled with remnants of a life lived humbly, family photos, worn furniture, and a small collection of tools neatly arranged in a corner. "I know," Sarah said with a smile. "But this isn't about us. It's about what your story has done for the community. People need to hear it." Mike sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I guess if it helps someone, it's worth it." As they talked, Sarah noticed a photo on the mantel. It was of a younger Mike, his arm around a smiling woman. The love in their eyes was unmistakable. Next to it was a photo of a little boy, no more than 5 years old, grinning mischievously. Sarah hesitated before asking, not wanting to pry. "Is this your family?" she finally ventured. Mike's expression softened as he glanced at the photos. "Yeah. That's my wife, Emily, and our son, Danny. They were my whole world." Sarah felt a pang of sadness. She had pieced together parts of Mike's story but hadn't realized just how much he had lost. "They look so happy," she said softly. "They were," Mike replied, his voice tinged with a mix of fondness and sorrow. Emily had a laugh that could light up a room, and Danny, he was a handful, but he had the biggest heart. Always wanted to help people, just like his mom. Sarah wanted to ask more but sensed that Mike wasn't ready to delve deeper. Instead, she steered the conversation back to the upcoming interview. They spent the afternoon discussing how to frame their story, focusing on the message of kindness and community rather than the personal details of their lives. When the day of the interview arrived, the reporter, a young woman named Emma, met them at the park where the event had been held. She was enthusiastic and warm, immediately putting both Sarah and Mike at ease. The interview began with Sarah recounting how her car had broken down and how Mike had come to her rescue. As she spoke, she realized just how extraordinary the chain of events had been, how one small act had led to something so much bigger. Mike, initially hesitant, eventually opened up about his philosophy of paying it forward. He spoke about the man who had helped him years ago, sharing the advice that had stayed with him ever since. Emma listened intently, her pen flying across the page as she took notes. "What do you hope people take away from this story?" Emma asked, turning to Sarah. Sarah thought for a moment before replying. "I hope it reminds people that kindness isn't about grand gestures or expecting something in return. It's about seeing someone in need and deciding to do something about it, no matter how small. We all have the power to make a difference." The interview concluded with Emma snapping a photo of Sarah and Mike standing in front of the board from the event, now displayed in the park as a permanent reminder of the community's commitment to kindness. As they posed, Sarah noticed a glimmer of pride in Mike's eyes, a quiet acknowledgement of the impact his actions had made. The article was published a week later, and the response was overwhelming. Emails and letters poured in from people across the state, sharing their own stories of kindness and expressing their gratitude for the reminder that humanity still had the capacity for good. The story even caught the attention of a local news station, which invited Sarah and Mike to appear on a morning show. Though the idea of being on TV made Mike visibly uncomfortable, he eventually agreed, realizing the opportunity to spread the message even further. The morning of the TV appearance, Sarah and Mike arrived at the studio, both nervous but determined. The hosts were welcoming, guiding them through the process and ensuring they felt comfortable. As the cameras rolled, Sarah recounted the story once again, emphasizing the ripple effect of kindness that had followed. Mike, though more reserved, spoke with quiet conviction about the importance of paying it forward and how it had shaped his life. The segment aired later that day, and the response was immediate. Messages flooded Sarah's social media, many from people inspired to start their own acts of kindness. Some were small, like buying coffee for a stranger, while others were more ambitious, like organizing community events or volunteering at shelters. The momentum was undeniable, and Sarah knew they had tapped into something powerful. But it wasn't just strangers who were affected. People in Sarah's own life began to change as well. Her co-workers started a weekly donation drive for a local food bank. Parents at Liam's school organized a fundraiser for underprivileged students. Even her neighbors, who had always been polite but distant, began reaching out, offering to help with errands or simply stopping by to chat. For Mike, the attention was both humbling and overwhelming. Though he shied away from the spotlight, he couldn't deny the impact the story was having. One evening, he received a letter in the mail with no return address. Inside was a handwritten note. "Mike, I read your story in the paper and wanted to thank you. Years ago, I was the man who stopped to help you on that dark road. I can't tell you how much it means to see how you've carried that kindness forward. You've done more good than I ever could have imagined. Thank you for keeping the spirit alive." Mike stared at the note for a long time, his hands trembling slightly. He hadn't expected to hear from the man who had helped him, let alone receive such heartfelt words. It was a full-circle moment, one that reminded him why he had made the promise all those years ago. When he showed the letter to Sarah, she was equally moved. "It's incredible," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've closed the loop, Mike. But more than that, you've opened the door for so many others." Mike nodded, his usual stoic demeanor softened by the realization of just how far the ripple had spread. "I guess it just goes to show," he said quietly, "you never know how much a small act of kindness can mean to someone." Sarah smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the journey they had both been on. The story wasn't just about a broken-down car or a kind stranger, it was about the power of connection, the resilience of the human spirit, and the infinite ways people could make the world a better place, one act of kindness at a time. The weeks following the TV appearance were transformative for both Sarah and Mike. What had begun as a simple act of kindness on the side of the road had blossomed into something much greater, a movement that was bringing people together in ways they hadn't imagined. While Sarah and Mike had always considered themselves ordinary people, their story had inspired a chain reaction of goodwill that was rippling far beyond their small town. One particularly cold evening, Sarah found herself sitting at her kitchen table, sifting through a stack of letters that had arrived in the mail. Ever since the article and TV segment, she had been inundated with messages from strangers, each one sharing their own stories of how they had been inspired to help someone or how they had been touched by an unexpected act of kindness. The letters were a mix of heartfelt gratitude, personal anecdotes, and even offers to collaborate on future events. One letter, however, caught her attention. Written in neat cursive on cream-colored stationery, it was from a man named Peter, who lived in a neighboring town. Peter explained that he had read about their story and wanted to reach out because it reminded him of a pivotal moment in his own life. He had been in a serious accident years ago, and a stranger had stopped to help him, staying by his side until an ambulance arrived. That stranger's act of selflessness had given him the strength to recover and rebuild his life. Peter's letter ended with a proposal. He wanted to host a regional, pay-it-forward, conference to bring together people from all walks of life to share their stories, exchange ideas, and inspire each other to continue the cycle of kindness. He asked if Sarah and Mike would be willing to help organize the event and serve as keynote speakers. Sarah was deeply moved by the letter and immediately called Mike to share the news. As she read the letter aloud, she could hear Mike's hesitation on the other end of the line. "I don't know, Sarah," he said, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "I'm not exactly a public speaker. That's more your thing." "Mike, this isn't about being perfect or polished," Sarah replied gently. "It's about sharing your story and showing people the impact of a single act of kindness. You don't have to do it alone, I'll be right there with you." After a long pause, Mike sighed. "All right," he said reluctantly. "If you think it'll help, I'll do it." With Mike's agreement secured, Sarah reached out to Peter, and the planning for the conference began. Over the next several weeks, Sarah and Mike worked closely with Peter and his team to organize the event. They secured a venue, reached out to speakers, and coordinated logistics. Sarah, with her background in project management, thrived in the chaos, while Mike focused on helping with practical tasks like setting up the space and ensuring everything ran smoothly. As the date of the conference approached, Sarah and Mike grew increasingly nervous. While Sarah was no stranger to speaking in front of groups, the idea of sharing such a personal story on a larger stage was daunting. For Mike, the thought of standing in front of hundreds of people was almost paralyzing. But the outpouring of support from their community kept them motivated. The day of the conference arrived, and the venue buzzed with energy. People from across the region filled the seats, ranging from families to business leaders to students. Booths lined the perimeter of the room, showcasing local initiatives and organizations dedicated to acts of kindness. The air was thick with anticipation as the opening remarks began. Sarah and Mike were scheduled to speak midway through the program, following a series of short talks by other individuals who had been inspired by the Pay It Forward movement. As the MC introduced them, Sarah took a deep breath, glancing at Mike. He looked nervous but determined. Together, they stepped onto the stage to a warm round of applause. Sarah began by recounting the story of her car breaking down and Mike's unexpected kindness. She spoke about how that single moment had not only helped her but had sparked a movement that was now bringing people together in ways she never could have imagined. Her voice wavered slightly as she described the ripple effect that had followed, the community event, the letters, and the countless stories of kindness that had poured in from across the region. When it was Mike's turn to speak, he hesitated for a moment, gripping the microphone tightly. The room fell silent as he began to speak, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'm not used to being in the spotlight," he admitted. "I'm just a regular guy who happened to be in the right place at the right time. But what I've learned through all of this is that you don't have to be extraordinary to make a difference. You just have to care enough to act." He went on to share the story of the stranger who had helped him years ago and the promise he had made to pay it forward. His words were simple but powerful, resonating deeply with the audience. By the time he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. The applause was thunderous as Sarah and Mike left the stage, their hearts pounding with a mix of relief and pride. Throughout the rest of the conference, they were approached by countless attendees who wanted to thank them, share their own stories, or simply express how much they had been inspired by their journey. One of the most memorable moments came toward the end of the day, when a young woman approached Mike. She introduced herself as Rachel and explained that she had been struggling with depression and isolation for years. After hearing their story, she had decided to volunteer at a local shelter, something she had been too afraid to do before. "I just wanted to thank you," Rachel said, her eyes brimming with tears. "Your story reminded me that even small actions can make a big difference. You've given me the courage to try." Mike was visibly moved, his usually stoic demeanor softening as he shook Rachel's hand. "Thank you for telling me that," he said quietly. "You've just made all of this worth it." As the conference came to a close, Sarah and Mike stood together, watching as people mingled, exchanged contact information, and made plans to collaborate on future projects. The sense of hope and possibility in the room was palpable, and Sarah couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment. Driving home that evening, Sarah reflected on how far they had come since the day her car had broken down. What had started as a moment of desperation had grown into something extraordinary, a testament to the power of human connection and the enduring impact of kindness. For Mike, the journey was equally transformative. Though he had never sought recognition or accolades, the experience had reminded him of the profound value of his own story. It wasn't just about paying it forward, it was about showing others that even in the face of loss and hardship, it was possible to create something meaningful. As the lights of their town came into view, Sarah glanced at Mike and smiled. "You know," she said, "I think this is just the beginning." Mike chuckled, shaking his head. "You might be right," he replied. "But if you're dragging me into more of this, I'm going to need a stronger cup of coffee." They both laughed, their bond stronger than ever, and their shared commitment to kindness unshakable. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: together, they were making the world a little brighter, one act of kindness at a time. The weeks after the regional Pay It Forward conference were a whirlwind of activity, reflection, and unexpected opportunities. For Sarah and Mike, life had taken on a new rhythm, one that revolved around community projects, heartfelt conversations, and growing connections with people who had been inspired by their story. Though neither of them had anticipated how far-reaching the effects of their journey would be, they both embraced it with a mix of awe and determination. One cold evening, as Sarah was tidying up her living room, she received an unexpected phone call. The voice on the other end introduced himself as David Cole, the founder of a national non-profit organization called Chain of Change. David had come across their story through the conference coverage and wanted to invite Sarah and Mike to collaborate on a new initiative, a nationwide campaign to promote acts of kindness and community building. Sarah's initial reaction was disbelief. She was just a single mom from a small town. How could she contribute to something on a national scale? But as David explained the campaign's vision and the impact he believed their story could have, her apprehension began to fade. The idea was ambitious but exciting. They would travel to cities across the country, sharing their story and helping local communities organize their own pay-it-forward events. "I'll have to talk to Mike about it," Sarah said, trying to process the enormity of the opportunity. "But thank you for thinking of us. It's an incredible idea." After hanging up, Sarah immediately called Mike. As she explained the proposal, she could sense his hesitation. Mike had always been a man of quiet action, preferring to help people one-on-one rather than standing in the spotlight. "I don't know, Sarah," he said after a long pause. "Traveling around the country, giving speeches, it's not really my thing." "I understand," Sarah replied. "But think about the lives we could touch. This isn't just about us, it's about inspiring others to create their own ripples of kindness. You don't have to decide right now, but at least consider it." Mike promised he would think about it, and for the next few days, Sarah waited anxiously for his answer. When he finally called her back, his voice was resolute. "All right," he said. "Let's do it. But only if we can keep the focus on the message, not on us." With Mike's agreement, Sarah contacted David, and plans for the campaign quickly took shape. They would visit 10 cities over the course of 3 months, partnering with local organizations to host events and share their story. The nonprofit would handle logistics, leaving Sarah and Mike free to focus on connecting with people and spreading their message. Their first stop was a bustling city several hours away. As they arrived at the event venue, Sarah couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and nerves. The turnout was larger than she had expected, with hundreds of people gathered in the auditorium. Mike, ever the introvert, looked slightly overwhelmed but determined to push through. The event began with a series of speeches from local leaders and activists, each one sharing their own experiences with acts of kindness. When it was Sarah and Mike's turn to take the stage, the audience greeted them with warm applause. As Sarah recounted their journey, she noticed how deeply the crowd seemed to connect with their story. When Mike spoke, his words carried a quiet authenticity that resonated with everyone in the room. After the event, attendees lined up to speak with them. Some shared their own stories of how small acts of kindness had changed their lives, while others expressed gratitude for the reminder that even in a divided world, humanity still had the capacity for good. One man, a veteran named Carl, told them how he had struggled with isolation after returning from service. Inspired by their story, he had decided to volunteer at a local community center, and it had completely transformed his outlook on life. "I just want to thank you," Carl said, his voice trembling slightly. "You reminded me that I'm not alone and that I can still make a difference." For Sarah and Mike, moments like these made every challenge worthwhile. As they traveled from city to city, they encountered countless individuals whose lives had been touched by kindness in unexpected ways. Each story they heard reinforced their belief in the power of human connection and the importance of paying it forward. But the journey wasn't without its challenges. The constant travel was exhausting, and the emotional weight of hearing so many deeply personal stories often left them drained. There were moments when Mike questioned whether they were truly making a difference or simply adding their voices to an already noisy world. One evening, after a particularly long day, Mike and Sarah sat together in a quiet cafe, reflecting on their experiences. "Do you ever feel like we're just scratching the surface?" Mike asked, his voice heavy with doubt. "Like no matter how much we do, it's never enough?" Sarah considered his words carefully. "I think it's normal to feel that way," she said. "But I also think that every story, every person we've met, proves that even small actions matter. We may not be able to change the whole world, but we can change someone's world. And that's enough. Mike nodded slowly, her words resonating with him. Though he still struggled with self-doubt, he knew that their efforts were making an impact, even if it wasn't always visible. As the campaign progressed, Sarah and Mike began to notice something remarkable. The events they hosted were sparking their own ripple effects, with attendees organizing their own initiatives and reaching out to help others. In one city, a group of high school students started a kindness club to perform random acts of kindness in their community. In another, a local business owner pledged to donate a portion of his profits to support struggling families. By the time the campaign concluded, Sarah and Mike had traveled thousands of miles, shared their story with thousands of people, and witnessed firsthand the transformative power of kindness. Though they were physically and emotionally exhausted, they both agreed that the experience had been worth every moment. As they returned to their small town, life slowly returned to its familiar pace. But the impact of their journey lingered, both in their community and in their own hearts. Sarah continued to organize local events, drawing on the connections she had made during the campaign to expand her efforts. Mike, true to his nature, resumed his quiet acts of kindness, helping people in need whenever and wherever he could. One day, as they sat together in the park where the first Pay It Forward Day had been held, Mike turned to Sarah with a rare smile. "You know," he said, "I never thought fixing a car would lead to all this." Sarah laughed, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Neither did I. But I think that's the beauty of it. Sometimes the smallest things can have the biggest impact." As they watched the sun set over the town they had both come to love, Sarah and Mike felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Though their journey was far from over, they knew they had already made a difference, and that was more than enough. Months had passed since the whirlwind campaign that took Sarah and Mike across the country. Their lives, though quieter now, still buzzed with the echoes of the stories they had heard and the connections they had made. The national campaign had solidified something in both of them, a deep-seated belief that kindness was not just an act, but a way of life. Yet, as much as they had seen the impact of their efforts, life had a way of presenting new challenges and opportunities to grow. Sarah had thrown herself back into her local projects, organizing monthly kindness circles, where community members could share stories and brainstorm ways to help one another. The circles became a lifeline for many in the town, a place where people could connect, share burdens, and find tangible solutions to everyday problems. What started as a simple gathering soon evolved into a network of support, with volunteers offering everything from childcare to home repairs for neighbors in need. Mike, on the other hand, had retreated into his quieter role. While he continued to help people in his unassuming way, repairing cars for free, mowing the lawns of elderly neighbors, and mentoring young men at the local community center, he avoided the spotlight. Sarah worried about him sometimes. The campaign had been transformative, but it had also taken a toll on Mike. The flood of attention and the weight of so many personal stories had left him emotionally drained. She sensed he was grappling with his own feelings of worthiness and purpose, even as he quietly made a difference in people's lives. One chilly autumn evening, Sarah decided to visit Mike. She brought along a casserole, knowing he often forgot to cook for himself. His house, as always, was neat and modest, the porch light casting a warm glow against the darkening sky. Mike greeted her at the door, his expression softening when he saw her. "You didn't have to do that," he said, taking the casserole dish from her hands. "I know," she replied with a smile. "But you'd probably just eat toast for dinner otherwise." He chuckled, motioning for her to come inside. They settled into the living room, the faint crackle of a fire in the background. As they ate, Sarah brought up an idea she had been mulling over for weeks. "Mike, I've been thinking," she began, setting her fork down. "What if we started something more permanent? A foundation or a community center dedicated to paying it forward? We could create a space for people to come together, share resources, and support each other. Mike frowned slightly, leaning back in his chair. That sounds big, Sarah. Bigger than anything we've done so far. I'm not sure I'm the right person for something like that. You are, though, she insisted. You've been living this philosophy your whole life. You've inspired me, inspired this town, and countless others. We can do this together. It doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to matter. For a long moment, Mike didn't respond. He stared at the fire, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but steady. I don't want this to become about me. If we do this, it has to be about the people it helps, not the people running it. Sarah nodded, understanding his concerns. Agreed. It's not about us. It's about creating something that lasts, something that keeps the ripple going. With Mike's tentative agreement, they began to lay the groundwork for what would eventually become the Ripple Effect Center. They envisioned it as a place where people could access resources, learn new skills, and connect with others in their community. From free workshops and job training to food drives and mental health support, the center would be a hub of kindness and empowerment. The process of establishing the center was anything but easy. They faced countless obstacles, funding issues, zoning regulations, and the logistical nightmare of finding a suitable location. But Sarah's relentless optimism and Mike's quiet determination proved to be a powerful combination. They rallied support from the community, secured grants, and even received a sizable anonymous donation that allowed them to purchase an old warehouse on the edge of town. Renovating the space became a community effort. Volunteers of all ages pitched in, painting walls, building shelves, and transforming the once dilapidated building into a warm and welcoming space. Mike, of course, led the charge on all things mechanical and structural, while Sarah focused on coordinating efforts and spreading the word. The grand opening of the Ripple Effect Center was a day that neither Sarah nor Mike would ever forget. Hundreds of people gathered to celebrate, their faces alight with hope and excitement. There were speeches, music, and even a ribbon-cutting ceremony, but the true highlight of the day came when people began exploring the space and discovering the possibilities it offered. One of the first visitors was a young mother named Elena, who had recently lost her job and was struggling to make ends meet. She was hesitant at first, unsure if the center could really help her. But within minutes, she was paired with a volunteer who helped her sign up for a resume workshop and connect with local childcare resources. By the end of the day, Elena left with tears in her eyes, grateful for the support she hadn't known was available. Stories like Elena's quickly became the heart of the Ripple Effect Center. Every day brought new faces and new challenges, but also new triumphs and connections. Sarah and Mike were constantly amazed by the resilience and generosity of the people they encountered. The center became more than just a resource hub, it became a symbol of what a community could achieve when it came together with a shared purpose. But the work wasn't without its struggles. One particularly difficult moment came when a storm caused significant damage to the center's roof, forcing them to close temporarily. The setback was disheartening, but the community rallied once again. Local businesses donated supplies, volunteers worked tirelessly to make repairs, and within weeks, the center reopened, stronger than ever. As the months turned into years, the Ripple Effect Center became a cornerstone of the town. It expanded its programs, offering everything from financial literacy classes to mental health counseling. It even inspired similar centers in neighboring towns, creating a network of kindness that stretched far beyond their original vision. For Mike, the journey was transformative in ways he hadn't anticipated. While he still preferred to work behind the scenes, he began to see himself not as a reluctant participant, but as a vital part of something much larger. The quiet satisfaction of seeing lives change, of knowing he had played a role in building something meaningful, brought him a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. Sarah, too, found herself changed by the experience. The center had become her life's work, a testament to her belief in the power of kindness and community. But more than that, it had shown her the strength she possessed, the ability to turn a moment of desperation into a movement of hope. One evening, as they stood outside the center after a particularly busy day, Sarah turned to Mike with a smile. "Do you ever think about how this all started? A broken-down car and a stranger with a toolbox." Mike chuckled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "It's funny, isn't it? You never know where life will take you." "No," Sarah agreed, her voice soft. "But I think we ended up exactly where we were supposed to be." As they watched the sun set over the town, casting a golden glow over the center that had become their legacy, they felt a profound sense of gratitude. Their journey had been anything but easy, but it had been worth every moment. Together, they had built something that would outlast them, a ripple effect that would continue to spread, touching lives and changing the world, one act of kindness at a time.